On Sunday, January 26, 2020, in the 133rd year of its existence, our church, the First Presbyterian Church of Titusville, Florida, closed. Ours was the first church congregation formed in Titusville, a fact of which we were all justifiably proud. During the celebration of our 130th year, longtime member Sandy Chamberlain introduced the Vice Mayor of Titusville, who made a proclamation recognizing our unique place in Titusville's history.
People have formed this church and can boast of their connection to the first church in Titusville. It may be determined from our book of records that over 500 baptisms have taken place here, and approximately 2,100 people have become members during the course of our history. It is because of that history, in celebration of that history, that now I would like to introduce to you Matt Behringer, Vice Mayor of Titusville.
An official proclamation from the city of Titusville, Florida. Whereas in 1886, Mary Patterson Robbins' father decided to build the first church in Titusville and put a collection plate in the ladies' cabin of his steamboat. And whereas on January 2nd, 1887, the first community church service was held in the parlor of the Titus Hotel in Titusville. And whereas on February 23rd, 1887, the services moved to the courthouse by Reverend J. H. Potter of the Presbytery of the Ozark, Missouri. And whereas Reverend Potter appointed Reverend John Foy from the Committee of the Horn Missions in the Presbytery of South Florida as the stated supply of the First Presbyterian Church. And whereas Mary Titus donated the corner of Pine Street and Hopkins Avenue for the First Presbyterian Church and donated corner lots for all churches to be built in Titusville. And whereas March 12, 1967, dedication services were held for the current First Presbyterian Church built on the corner of Park and Gulfview Avenues, the same year in which Titusville observed its centennial. Now, therefore, I, Matt Behringer, by the authority vested in me as Vice Mayor, do hereby dedicate this 130th anniversary celebration of the First Presbyterian Church in the city of Titusville.
We do know a little more about First Presbyterian's history because in honor of our church's 100th anniversary year, Connie White, Helen Farnsworth, and Michael Lafferty compiled and edited a historical document. Here are a few excerpts from First Presbyterian Church, 1887 to 1987, our first 100 years. The First Presbyterian Church of Titusville was born on a steamboat on the Indian River in 1886. According to Mary Patterson Robbins, Titusville at that time was a city of saloons, and people from as far as Eden would come up the river in sailboats to get a supply of liquor. There were several saloons and no churches. That situation soon changed. Mrs. Robbins wrote the following vivid account of how it happened. The first church was a community church with a Presbyterian minister. My father started the subscription for it by placing a plate on a table in the ladies' cabin of his boat with a card worded thus: "This is to build a church in Titusville. We have no church in Titusville." And it was beautiful to see how quickly people responded to the call, and liberally. So in less than 6 months, the Presbyterian Church was built and furnished. We bought a chandelier that we paid $500 for. At that time, there was no electric light plant, so the chandelier was made up of small lamps set on pine rings. Kerosene oil was used in the pipes, and it usually took a man a day to clean those lamps and fill the pipes with oil. Some very well-known families in Titusville were members of our church. According to its records, the infant baptisms of Sadie Duran, later Sadie Nobles, and Arthur Franklin Duran were recorded in the books on May 20th, 1894, and that of George Foy Duran on March 29th, 1908. On September 8th, 1889, Mrs. Rosa H. Titus and Pierre Titus were received into the church, she on examination and he by letter from Presbyterian Church of Thomasville, Georgia. On April 26, 1914, Mrs. Emma Louise Parrish was received into the church by letter from M.E. Church, Bowling Green, Florida. In the afternoon, Jesse Jackson Parrish was baptized. The church was constructed of the best grade of southern yellow pine, and other denominations were allowed to hold meetings there while their churches were being built during the next 3 years. Titusville then had a population of about 400 people and was a prosperous and growing town, the county seat since 1879. On July 1st, 1980, Sadie Duran Nobles, born in 1891, and her younger brother Foy Duran were interviewed and gave their recollections of the first church. They described the interior this way. The rugs in the church were made of palm fiber matting, and the aisles had runners of the matting in red and brown. In the winter the church was heated with a pot-bellied coal-burning stove, which stood in the back in the corner by the choir. The Pine Street Church stood until 1967, when it was taken down and the new church was built. In an article in the Star Advocate in 1971, Quinn Scherr stated that the old white-framed church featured a quaint tower and impressive stained glass windows with names of longtime church members lettered on them. The one in the back was for the Westminster Guild, and the ones on the sides were memorial windows. These were not moved to the new church because they were not true stained glass. They were made during World War II, when high-quality lead was very scarce. The stained glass window of the Parish family now graces the chapel of Parish Medical Center in Titusville. So let's start with just the names.
Charlotte Patsky.
And Joan Throckmorton.
And Frances Askew.
Okay.
I started to the church when I was 5 years old. And it was the little church downtown, and I walked up the wooden steps. And Foy Duran was the man that took care of the ringing of the bells. And if you got there early enough, one of the children, you could pull the bell down and ring the bell. And we were all so excited about that, you know, kids, how they are. And so then I sat in the front pew and watched my mother and my aunt sing in the choir. They were in the regular choir, and Mrs. Ziegler played the organ, and it was really a nice service. And at Christmas time, the man came from Titusville and came in as Santa Claus, and the parishes gave us a little container of candy and an orange. And the tree was so tall. It was a beautiful tree. And let's see. So then when I was about, I guess, I taught Sunday school the first time when I was 10, because they needed a teacher for Sunday school. And then when I was around 13, Reverend Becker was the preacher at that time, and he taught me a lot about religion, and that's when I started teaching the young people at night, and we would have meetings, and then we would go sometimes to the beach. Carl Boyd had a skeeter, and we would all get together and go to the beach and have wheatie roasts, and we just did all kinds of fun things, especially during the summertime. And then later on in years, well, I was about 18 when I joined the choir, and I sang in the choir 72 years. And so that was really a fun time for me because I loved music so much.
You were an elder?
An elder. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, a deacon and an elder.
Well, then they had other programs during Halloween. We had special Halloween programs.
Yeah.
And then she was all dressed up, and they did
That was
different
fun.
games.
I dressed up one time, and they didn't know who I was, and I won a prize. And when I took my face mask off, they said, "Oh, it's Joni." It was so funny. And it's just good.
Chuck and I came to Florida, and we were in O'Galley, and then we moved up here in 1969 and joined the Little White Church, and really liked that church. But we got involved in the building fund and to build this church. And over the years, we've done so many things in the church, and met so many people. And of course, one of the first things I did was I said, do you have a women's group? And yes, and we had, how many did we have? We had morning, afternoon, and evening, didn't we?
We had 3.
And we were, of course, we were both working, and so I first joined in the evening group that met in the homes in the evenings. And of course, we were involved with a lot of things. Chuck did a lot of building projects, going up to see, on the roof to see how the air conditioner was working and all kinds of things. And I was involved with working in the office. At one period, I was a bookkeeper in the office, and of course was busy with circle meetings. And Chuck, we both at one time or another were on the session, raised our 4 children in this church.
And how long have you been at this church?
I became a member of this church back in 1955 when we moved here from New Hampshire. And my husband and I and the 2 children, both children went here to the Sunday schools and were active in the youth program. And when we moved from the old church to this church, it was a beautiful church, and still is. And the first or second Sunday during our service, the pews started falling down. They weren't fastened enough on the seat or something, and then one lady's hat went flying up over. Not all of them did, but I mean, there were just some of them that did. And then over the years, of course, different things, I've been involved in lots of different things. And way back then, my husband and I started a monthly newsletter, which I typed up on that old stuff and ran it off on a mimeograph at one of the local schools here in town, because we didn't have any of that stuff here at the church.
The First Presbyterian Church Newsletter, November 1962. Diamond Anniversary well attended. The 75th anniversary celebration at our church will be long remembered by many members. After a period of getting acquainted, Reverend Bates gave the blessing. The members lined up to partake of the delicious food. The lights began to fade, and it looked like we were going to have a candlelight supper. Several minutes later, the lights went out completely. But this was only for a minute, in order to change the fuses in the kitchen. And soon thereafter, the lights were restored to normal. A large anniversary cake was cut. The honors were given to 2 of our oldest members present, Mrs. Scobie and Foy Duran. The choir entertained with several numbers, and games for the adults followed. All the ladies had to remove their shoes and pile them up in the middle of the floor. At a given signal, the husbands had to find their wife's shoes. Jack Martin was the winner. Another game was a list of commercial slogans frequently heard over TV and radio advertisements. Some of the slogans were, "A little dabble do ya," "Hasn't scratched yet," "The big gallon," "It's what's up front that counts." The First Presbyterian Church Newsletter, April 1963. It is with deep sorrow that we learn of the passing of Mrs. J.J. Parrish, Sr., Miss Emma. On Friday evening at her home, heartfelt sympathies are extended to all members of the family. The First Presbyterian Church, July 1963 Newsletter. Presbyterians Act to End Bias. Des Moines. The United Presbyterian Church, in a series of sweeping constitutional proposals, has moved to end social and economic discrimination against Negroes by local churches. The church also acted on pleas for government aid to hold down the population explosion and assure a better deal for migrant workers. Many of our members have served in the armed forces, and many worked in support of the American space program. From the Mercury program to Gemini to Apollo to the Space Shuttle and the Space Launch System. Here Beth Mathis talks about her father, Sam Bedingfield, and his work on the Apollo 11 launch.
Space is my heritage. My dad came down here in 1959 to start manned space flight. My parents had to build a house because there was no place to rent so that they could ship the crib because my sister was due any day. I was born on John Glenn's 40th birthday and got a birthday cake from him. So space is my heritage, and I have grown up with it. But I think the most remarkable thing is how unremarkable it was when I was growing up. Everybody's daddy worked for the space program. Everybody's daddy was sending somebody to the moon. I went to Apollo Elementary School, and Mr. Moon was my principal. And we would step outside and watch the launches. We didn't realize how incredible it was. And nobody's dad was home.
And longtime member Jim Seaman on his involvement in the space program.
But we did the checkout on the command module and the lens from Apollo 1 all the way through 17, and the highlight of that was Apollo 11. So, thank you.
Both of the two previous clips were filmed during the 50th anniversary celebration of the Apollo 11 moon landing held at our church. But an audience member also wanted to speak that evening.
I remember very clearly where I was this day 50 years ago, and that was in Vietnam. I was an infantry platoon leader, and we were out in the jungles of Ai Kor, which was the northern part of Vietnam, and they brought us in to a place called Fire Support Base Sledge to get cleaned up, change our uniforms, clean our weapons, and go out. And it happened to be today, 50 years ago. We knew nothing about what was going on. We knew there was a space race. We'd grown up with it in the 50s and 60s, but as far as going to the moon on Apollo 11, we didn't know anything. But we went into the Fire Support Base that night. They had a television there, which we hadn't seen television, and they showed the moon landing by Armed Forces Vietnam at that fire base. Still kind of emotional. And I want to tell you guys, you may never have heard this, our morale wasn't the greatest in the world. But that night, watching the moon landing before they loaded us up the next day and sent us back out, we went out the next day with a different feeling about America, about what we were doing, where we were in the world. So you may never have heard that from anybody, but you made a difference to people that were in that faraway land on that day. So thank you.
The First Presbyterian Church Newsletter, May 1971. Our nation is sorely troubled. A major cause is the continuing war in Southeast Asia. Although substantial numbers of combat forces have been withdrawn, the war has been widened geographically, and additional thousands of combatants and non-combatants are still being killed. Increasing numbers of citizens are recognizing that we are all personally implicated in the war, and we are sick at heart. Our cure must be in repentance and renewal. As a sign of our mourning for all those who have already died in Southeast Asia, and our sorrow that the killing continues, we urge that the bells of all places of worship be tolled from 12 noon to 1 p.m. on May 1st. May God in His infinite mercy grant us peace. By the early 1960s, the membership of the church had grown to more than 400, partly due to the population boom caused by the creation of NASA and the building of Kennedy Space Center. The small wooden church on the corner of Pine Street and Hopkins Avenue struggled to fit in all of its worshipers during the 2 Sunday services. In addition, a recent decision by the government in Tallahassee to place Florida's most popular highway, US 1, on Hopkins Avenue going southbound, where it would create a great deal of traffic moving past the church, was causing significant distress to the folks at First Presbyterian. Moving to a larger church in a more sedate location began to seem like the solution to the church's problems. On March 3, 1963, members voted to relocate.
My name is Barbara Ziegler, and I started in this church when I was a baby. That would have been 1947. And I went to this church all the way through the ministry of Charlie Bates. In my childhood, I told my uncle one time that I wanted to sing the Lord's Prayer in church, and he said, "You'll never do that." And I said, "Oh, yeah." So I went to Hobart Whitman, who was the choir director at the time, and I believe Mrs. Tolis was the organist. And he said, "Okay, we'll let you do it." I got so nervous singing for the choir I couldn't hold my dinner down. And he says, "Don't you worry. This is a good Christian person. Don't you worry, you make a mistake. It gives us a chance to show you how much we love you." So Yeah, I remember Holbert Whitman, and I remember Betty Marston, who was the organist choir director here. Also, Peggy Lance was the choir director in the old church. We also, I think Mildred McVeigh, I want to say, was an organist for a while. My uncle, my grand uncle, was choir director, and his wife Zoe was organist for a while, but that would have been back in the 30s. 30s and early 40s.
What were their last names?
Ziegler.
Also Ziegler.
Also Ziegler, yeah. And we did a lot of things. I remember things like having Sunday school. We would have an assembly before Sunday school, and we'd sing all the old traditional songs, like Standing on the Promises and things like that. That's where I heard He Lives, which is one of my favorite hymns. And then we'd be over here all the time. I remember sitting in the window. In the fellowship hall, there were 3 great big windows on one side of it, which faced US 1. And we'd sit in there because we had no air conditioning at that time.
This is the building.
This is the old
white church building that was on Hopkins and Pine Street.
Yes. And it was, the sanctuary was here and the fellowship was right next to it, right next to Hopkins. I remember doing Vacation Bible School, and everybody had a special section where we worked on flowers or we worked on different projects. I remember the Riedigers, Herman and Elsie Riediger. Elsie was from England, and Herman was a tremendous bass in our choir, and he was always giving us little ideas of how to sing better and trying to help us along. Charlie Ponton, naturally, was just a tremendous singer. And we had some Sundays, the old sanctuary was so full when we were getting close to the 60s, when we had to sell the building there and move out here to Park Avenue, where we'd have to open up the big sliding doors on the side of the sanctuary, which opened into the fellowship hall, and we'd overflow, almost filling up that fellowship hall. Charlie Bates was a unique minister. I remember him doing his sermon, and also talking about the people who had Rolls Royces. And at that time, J.J. Parrish Jr. just bought a Rolls Royce for his wife. So we had a lot of fun teasing them.
They were members of the church.
They were members of the church. They were members of the church from when they were born. The Parrish family was a long time. And, of course, there was Truman Sr., and I remember him marrying Jane, his second wife.
That would be Truman Scarborough.
Truman Scarborough Jr. is the one we know as the county commissioner, but it's his father.
Okay.
And Jane was a teacher in the area elementary schools. And we did a lot of different things. We had a youth fellowship. We went to Lake Placid and had a grand time, and lots of different activities and swimming and things like that. And I was so inspired that once we got over here and I was in my 20s, I volunteered to be a youth advisor as well, and took the kids to Lake Placid. So we also had lots of fun for Halloween, various Halloween activities, bobbing for apples and scaring each other. We did Christmas caroling. With the transition, we had a lot of the general things, and we had a pretty good size service, and a lot of people from the Cape. We were just, every church was just bulging at the seams at this time. But towards the end of Charlie Bates's tenure here, I guess the membership started to fall off, and they decided that they needed to get a new minister. And that was the time. We were very big supporters of Charlie and Vivian Bates. And so that's when we left to go to St. Luke's. Then after that, I did many years singing at other churches, being a hired soloist. And then finally, about 2 years before Mother passed away, we started at the Methodist church. And after she passed, I felt like I just wanted to come back home. So I came back here, and I got to say, this congregation is one of the most loving congregations I've ever been in. So that's my story. That's all I can think of right now.
Okay.
The new church, a 2-story A-frame structure with a spire, a rose window, and a bell tower, would be built on the corner of Park Avenue and Golfview Drive, where the Whispering Hills Golf Course had once stood. It seated 500 and cost $350,000. It was dedicated in a ceremony on March 12, 1967. The rose window in the Advent cross design was given by Gwendolyn Woodman in memory of her husband John. The pulpit and lectern were given in memory of Emma Parrish. Many others donated gifts for the new church, but perhaps the most spectacular was the gift of an enormous handmade Skinner pipe organ. The largest of its 600 pipes was the size of a small water main, and the smallest was not as big as a pencil. It contained a set of chimes as well, and was given by Mrs. Roy Roberts, Sr., in memory of her late husband. Roy Roberts had been a Florida state representative, a citrus grower, an automobile dealer, and a Brevard County sheriff.
And you know the stained glass going into the sanctuary was
Yeah.
one of our members
Yeah.
did that. Ola Cryway.
Ola Cryway.
Ola Cryway.
Old
Yeah.
Cryway.
Yeah.
She actually gave it or
She
created
made it.
She made it.
Yes, she made it.
No,
Yeah,
she
but-
made those, and she did, Easter, she did eggs. you know.
Easter eggs, like the
Yeah.
Russian Easter eggs, you know.
The Pansk eggs, P-A-N-S-K-E, Pansk.
Some of
eggs.
us has some of those.
Yeah, I do too.
I have.
I've given a lot of them to some of the ladies in the
You
in the
probably did
circle.
the one I have probably, because I got one
Yeah.
of those.
Oh, did you?
And she did a lot of stained glass work, I think.
Thanks to Pastor Mary Sample. She gave it to me. She knew how much I liked Ola because she was an alto in the choir.
Oh, okay, so I love her already. She's now going to bring us over.
That's one of her eggs.
It's one of her eggs.
So,
Well,
you get to talk some more.
I had a small egg from her, but after she went to live in the nursing home near her daughter on the west coast of Florida, and Mary retired, she gave this to me, and I treasure it.
Some of those pews, I bought a pew. The pew cost $1,200.
Wow.
That I bought that.
When in the 1960s they were changing US 1 to where they were going to split it so it would go right by our church, and they were afraid to leave the church there for fear the kids would get hit by cars. So then they moved the church. The parish has donated the land here, and in fact I understand that the aisle in the sanctuary goes down the 9th fairway, and there was a big dedication ceremony here in the new church after it was built. The dedication service was rather exciting. I'm sure a lot of people have told you about that, in that it started on Sunday morning, and I was singing in the choir. This was when Betty Marsden, I believe, was that. Maybe Hobart was still there. But we were getting ready for the service, and my entire family showed up, which was my parents, my 2 brothers, and 2 uncles that had come down to visit. And they sat down, and within 5 minutes, their pew fell apart. Well, everybody went, oh, okay, that maybe it was just that one. And then about 15, 20 minutes later, another pew fell apart. It's just the seat just fell down. And after the 3rd one went, I understand Pat Clark always said that she sat through that service by just squatting. She never let her bottom hit the seat. The dedication service was really beautiful, and we were the only church, and have been the only church, that had a pipe organ in the north area.
I've got a picture of this. You know the cross up on the roof way up there? My grandson and my son-in-law built that, and my grandson got up there and stood up there on a ladder and put that cross up there And his mother and I were just standing down there, you know.
He was on the roof
He
on
was
a ladder.
on the roof on a ladder, holding this cross and putting it up there. I tell you, I almost died of a heart attack. I have pictures of him up there.
And you were talking about the circle meetings. The one circle, there were the three circles, and one would meet in the morning, one in the daytime, and the nighttime one would meet in different homes. And we would meet in individual homes, and they would have refreshments along with the Bible study that we were doing.
And I think Charlotte probably worked on that more than a lot of us, because she almost always was the secretary to do the minutes.
I was also moderator or chairman of the circle group for 1 year.
Yeah.
And then I helped with the Wednesday night tutoring program. Each circle had the chore, it wasn't really a chore, but they do the men's fellowship, men's dinner once a month. And they chose which month they wanted to do it. It wasn't just people doing it. It was the members of the circle that had to do it. Each one had a turn doing it once a month.
So it's the men's dinner, but the women actually do the work.
Yeah. They prepared the meal, served it, and cleaned up afterwards.
So why is it the men's dinner then?
That was way back then.
That's how.
Arlene Baxter.
Good.
And we came in 1957, so got 62 years of Presbyterian Church that I won't ever give up for anything, and so many memories from the beginning to now. And we came with one child into the little white church over on Pine Street, I believe it was. They had several meetings because there were so many already. And so from there we enjoyed that time, and our family grew, the church grew, and in 1960, 66 I believe, came to this church. By that time we had 5. All were baptized in one of the 2 churches. 2 of the children were married in this church. It was such a big church, so many children, Sunday school classes, and all the boys, some of the teachers dreaded to have, but they enjoyed them no less. And from then on, after my husband passed in '96, I took on more responsibilities here, which I certainly was glad to do, as this is my church. I was an elder for 2 years, 2 sessions, and one of the first ones, I think I was kind of talked into taking over the coffee time in the fellowship time after the church service, which I enjoyed. And also there was a lot of sorting out, cleaning up, so forth, the kitchen to make it even be able to get through there. So I enjoyed doing that and got it all nice and neat. And I guess life just continued on in that way. But the only problem, I'm beginning to see the church that was so active and so many young people were not coming. And so with that, things just kind of got a little bit slow around here. And at this point is where we are. But I love this church. I would come to the very last day. I hope just to come in and help do whatever we need around here. And with that, I will close.
Wait, not yet. You made these banners, no?
Absolutely. I knew I'd forget something. I will back up to the big event of what I did with great love and anticipation, the banners that you see around the church. I was asked to make those. One lady took pictures of them all anyway as to what was going to be sewn. Another young girl who is a very good artist, and she could draw. She made the patterns for me, because I can't sew without a pattern, pretty much. I'm not that great. And I loved everyone. As I finished one, I couldn't wait to start the next one. And since I have a closet full of fabric, it was helped my stash also. And there are a couple of little pieces I had to purchase, but it was very much so. Part of my life, my home, is in these banners. They mean so much to me. And I hope to see them continue in a church somewhere. At this point, I can just say no more, except I love the Presbyterian Church.
The banners are amazing. The First Presbyterian Church Newsletter, February 1993. At their January luncheon, members of Presbyterian Women surprised Rose Ellen Calvert with a life membership pin and honored her as Woman of the Year for their organization. Rose Ellen has served as elder, deacon, and trustee at different times through the years, and has been active in Presbyterian Women, both locally and at the presbytery level. She served as president of United Presbyterian Women in the Northeast Florida Presbytery. Rose Ellen established the 2 cents a meal concept in 1975, which has grown into an important part of the hunger program of the Presbyterian Church USA.
I'm Carol Carlson.
And Carey Stiles.
Mother and daughter.
Yeah.
We joined the church in 1963 when it was the little wooden white church downtown. Carey was 18 months old, and my first memory is putting her in Sunday school the first Sunday, which was down in the basement. And after church, Art and I went down and opened the door to get her out. She saw the door open and she made a beeline out of there and ran down the hall. She was going. That's my first memory.
And I'm still here.
Okay. So you remember when you moved to the new church?
Yes, that was 1967. I joined the choir immediately. I always sang in church choirs. And I was also a pianist, accompanist. Had been since I was a teenager. And I did that occasionally. And then we moved to the new building. I remember Zoe Ziegler was the organist, Barbara Ziegler's grandmother. Yes.
It was her grandmother?
Grandmother.
Zoe was her grandmother.
That's right.
And she was the organist. And I was very interested in organ. And I started taking lessons. And I started subbing occasionally. And then in 1972, I became the organist. And I was there until 2005, 33 years.
So it was really a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We had a lot of people there. We had a lot of people coming to church and a lot of children. So we had a good children's group.
Yeah.
And then most of the children, they got married and moved away.
They moved away.
Yeah, but they didn't have anywhere to work in town. The town never did really grow. So, but it was a good place to live, you know. And the church was a wonderful church. And it always has been.